Like and subscribe right now, or this spider will crawl on your face when you're sleeping. The Chernobyl explosion is by far the worst nuclear disaster the world has ever seen. Since the incident, there have been countless findings, some being so unbelievable. Who would have thought that animals would survive this carnage? Keep watching to see 8 things discovered in Chernobyl that shocked the entire world. Number 1. Chernobyl may have been a hive for wildlife. While you might think that the area around the Chernobyl nuclear plant is desolate, science tells us something different. Researchers have found some plants that have been off-limits to humans for 3 decades. This area houses several deer, bison, lynx, and other animals roaming through the thick forest. The area is called the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone, and it covers 2,800 square kilometers of northern Ukraine. It's named the 3rd largest nature reserve in mainland Europe and has become an iconic site. The exclusion zone is an example of nature's power to recover from degradation. The UNEP is working with relevant agencies in Ukraine to revitalize the region and create a transboundary protection area. In the spring of 1986, Chernobyl's reactor caught fire and exploded, sending radiation into the atmosphere. Research in the Belarusian sector of the exclusion zone found that the elk, boar, deer, and roe populations exploded between 1987 and 1996. By the mid-1990s, wolves were so plentiful that they were a nuisance to farmers. Endangered animals like Przewalski's horse were almost extinct until scientists realized it flourished in this unexpected territory. Fortunately for the wildlife in this undisturbed region, Ukrainian authorities believe the region won't be inhabitable by humans for another 24,000 years. This flourishing wildlife is a breath of home for animals in the face of the tragic ecological disaster that has befallen our environment. Number 2. It's a spooky tourist attraction in Chernobyl. Despite being the site of the world's worst nuclear disaster, the area has attracted thousands of curious tourists. Ukraine announced that it would be an official tourist attraction in 2019. After an HBO miniseries narrating the tragedy on the site was released, more people trooped into the area. The country felt it was better to open it to more people to counter some of the negative narratives. Announcing it as a tourist attraction was the best step to giving Chernobyl new life. For over 2 decades, the authorities have maintained the exclusion zone around the reactor, including Pripyat, a city once home to 50,000 people. While many might think the region was bleak, the president assured that the environment was recovering from the hurt. Although most of the area has been open to tourists since 2011, the country wants to boost dark tourism in the region. The first step to opening the area is creating a green tourist corridor. This will offer official and safe entry to the exclusion zone. Although travelers can visit Chernobyl with a guide, no official Ukrainian law authorizing tourism in the region exists. Unfortunately, the exclusion zone is a symbol of corruption in the country. Security officials collect bribes from tourists to let them in or export some crap. Number 3. There was no containment building. Like all Soviet reactors of this type, the Chernobyl reactor didn't have a containment building over the reactor. This building ought to be a shielding deck of thick concrete blocks that protect personnel against radiation, but portions of it are held down by gravity. The building confines fission products released into the atmosphere during an accident. To make things worse, the reactor's emergency system was switched off when the accident happened. While performing a maintenance test, the workers mistakenly disabled the emergency core cooling system. This caused a series of operational mistakes that led steam to build up. Had there been a containment building, the effect of the accident would have been minimized to a great deal. Thanks to the international community's intervention, a confinement building worth $1.7 billion was built. Over 40 independent nations have contributed to this cause. Following the testing and commissioning of the facility, it was handed over to the Ukrainian government in 2020. This new safe confinement prevents the release of contaminated material from the present shelter and protects the structure from external impacts. This new structure is tall enough to house Paris's Notre Dame Cathedral and strong enough to withstand a tornado. Its ventilation system eliminates the risk of corrosion. Number 4. The true toll of the Chernobyl disaster. Springtime is the busiest year for women in Chernihiv because over 21,000 tons of wool pass through the factory from farms across the country during the annual sheep shearing period. Soon after the reactor exploded, some women started getting sick. Some complained of nausea and dizziness, while others suffered nosebleeds. When the authorities investigated the incident, they found radiation levels in the factory up to 180 mSVHR. The city was 50 miles from the site of the nuclear plant, so the inhabitants were marked safe. The area was yellow on the map, meaning it wasn't hit hard. However, reports say the disaster impacted the wool workers in Chernobyl. Official reports say that only 31 people died as an immediate result of the accident, but a 2005 study predicted that the deaths from the radiation exposure might be up to 4,000. When the female survivors of the city were interviewed, they confirmed that only 10 women working in the factory were alive. The others died from one complication or another. Number 5. The Soviet Union tried to cover up the problem. Over 3 decades ago, an accident in Chernobyl changed the cause of living for people in the area forever. The explosion caused a roof and wall on one of the buildings to collapse, resulting in a radioactive cloud released into the air. The Soviet Union made it worse with its lack of transparency. In the days that followed, the Union refused to expose the extent of the disaster. When Sweden contacted the Soviet Atomic Power Inspection Board, they denied that an accident had occurred. However, the country wasn't convinced, as it reported unusually high levels of radioactivity in the area. The public outcry for more details forced the government to reveal the true situation of things. They acknowledged that it had happened, but said it was an ordinary event. Russia televised an announcement a day after the incident, showing a picture supposedly taken by a worker after the accident. They told the viewers that reports of extensive damage and fire were unfounded, and that cleanup operations had started. However, safety experts didn't buy these claims. On April 30th that year, the equivalent of Ukraine's Surgeon General submitted a report to the Council of Ministers saying there was a severe increase in gamma radiation levels. He asked the inhabitants of Kiev to be wary of the danger. However, the Ukrainian Communist Party ordered the May Day activities to go ahead, since there was a normal radiation situation in Kiev. This was the most inhumane thing to do in that situation. Number 6. The death toll is unknown in Chernobyl. There's been a never-ending debate over the number of deaths associated with the Chernobyl disaster. The weight of scientific opinion holds that there's no threshold below which ionizing radiation poses no risks. In cases where people are exposed to low-level radiation, public health studies are unlikely to be able to show an increase in cancer rates. While there's consensus that 30 people died from the disaster, this figure is contested in many corners. It's believed that the number of long-term deaths could be 4,000 for people in Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine, but 16,000 across Europe. About 60,000 people also suffered minor injuries around the globe. Aside from deaths, disability rates among liquidators rose over the years. However, experts didn't confirm any direct correlation between radiation exposure and an increase in cancer disease. The number of thyroid cancers in children was also higher than normal. While about 600,000 people were granted liquidator status due to their participation in liquidating the Chernobyl nuclear plant, studies show they could be up to 830,000, about 112,000, and 125,000 had died by 2005. Number 7. People still live there legally. After the Chernobyl explosion on April 26, 1986, those living around the area, about 116,000 people, were evacuated. A 3-kilometer exclusion zone was imposed around the damaged reactor. It was later expanded to cover more affected areas. A few months later, 234,000 people were relocated. Nearly all of them left in a hurry, leaving some personal belongings behind. Others were told they'd be gone for a few days. Years later, they still struggled to return to their homes. Despite warnings of the dangers of living in the location, some never left. About 130 to 150 people comprising males, females, and children still live there. Many of the women are farmers, still farming on their ancestral land. Outside the exclusion zone, too, you can find a few newcomers to the area. Ivan Shamyuk told the press in 2016 that he lives in the Belarusian village in the exclusion zone and refused to leave despite government offers. He said he never felt the radiation's effects and has no problems with his health. There are basic amenities like a mobile phone signal, electricity, and gas, but the water is polluted. Inhabitants must boil it before it's used. A house in good condition costs around $3,500, but it's rare to find one. Most houses are made of wood and sold for a few $100s. Number 8. Abortions were performed on women after the disaster. After the Chernobyl incident, there were rumors that children in the womb absorbed radiation instead of their mothers. While long-term studies suggest that babies exposed to Chernobyl in the womb increased the chances of thyroid cancer, there was no substantive proof. There was also no proof that congenital disabilities were higher among babies delivered by women who lived near the disaster. Even after doctors clarified that the babies born after the incident showed no signs of abnormality, it didn't allay the fears of pregnant women. Many felt they couldn't trust doctors with the health of their unborn children. As a result, tens of thousands of women ended their pregnancies. About 100,000 to 200,000 pregnancies were aborted in Western Europe because some physicians advised patients that the radiation could affect their unborn babies. Of course, some women opted out of their pregnancies for reasons other than radiophobia and prenatal abnormalities. The mental health toll of the disaster is considered the largest public health problem unleashed by any accident. The population was 4 times more likely to report anxiety, stress, depression, and PTSD than the control groups. Until next time, adios.